What are your names?
Evenell Perry.
Joe Howard Perry.
Where and when were you born?
I was born in Avery County, in a little town, near a little town called Evenell Park, and it was October 7th, 1941.
I was born in Banner Elk, North Carolina, on the 17th day of May, 1938, at 8:32 in the morning.
Did you grow up in these places?
Yes, I grew up mostly in Elk Park, and then after graduating from high school, I worked at a hosiery mill, earned some money, and went to nurses training in Banner Elk.
Okay, yeah, that goes along with the next question I had. But
Yeah, I was raised here in Banner Elk.
what jobs have you had throughout your childhood? Or
Working on farms. I was raised on a farm here in Banner Elk and doing farm work for other farm families.
okay, have either of you ever served in the military?
I have. I was in the Air Force from May of 56 till August of 1960.
Okay, do you have any stories throughout that you'd like to say?
Nothing of interest. I was a personnel specialist and did morning reports.
Okay.
Was stationed in Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, and for 2 years, and 2 years in Biloxi, Mississippi, at Keesler Air Force Base.
What are some of the places you've traveled throughout your life?
Go ahead with yours.
Well, when I was in the Air Force, I didn't get to travel. I stayed at the bases. Didn't get much traveling in. When I got out of the Air Force, I've made a trip to Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, Springfield, Oregon. When I was a young kid, I went to Portsmouth, Virginia when I was 6 years old and rode back to Banner Elk on a bus by myself, visiting my brother. And he was in the Navy, and I would go visit him some summers, and I've been to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Portsmouth, Virginia, Asheville, North Carolina.
Okay, do you have any places?
When I was growing up, we did all sorts of jobs on the farm, and I babysit for the neighbors' kids. I was never out of North Carolina and Tennessee till I was 18, and I went to Ohio to spend the summer with some of my aunts and uncles that lived there. And after I was married and we moved to Oregon, I worked in a nursing home. We moved back to Banner Elk for a while. Joe went to electrician school in Kinston, so we moved down there for a while. And then mostly just, vacations and stuff like that was we out of the state, to as far south as Florida and as far west as Oregon, and I guess as far as north, we did get to tip in New York one time when we was going somewhere, didn't we? And then the doctor I was working for was doing mission trips, and I started doing mission trips down middle Mexico, medical and dental mission trips.
Okay, we're going to try to start back. Those are just general questions. We're going to start with childhood mostly. What is your earliest childhood memory?
The earliest memory? I'd say I must have been about 4 and a half, and I remember a little bit about it. I can remember being outside with my sister and my brother, and for some reason there was a lot of woods around my grandfather's place, And for some reason they thought they were lost, and they were crying and said, we'll never get back home. And I thought it was real funny because I could see the barn from where we were. My sister reminded me of this a while back. And I thought that was really funny. That's something that I remembered.
And what about you?
Well, Evenell says that my first memory was when I was 6 years old, because anything I've ever done, she says I was 6 years old when I done it, or I tell her that. But I guess the first memories that I had was my brother and sister sucking the bottle, taking milk from the bottle, laying in the middle of the floor with their legs crossed, sucking on the bottle.
Let's see. What do you think was the hardest part of your childhood, by any chance? Any challenges you had growing up, or?
Well, when we were growing up younger, we didn't have water in the house, and we had to carry it from the spring in a bucket. And the spring that was pretty close to our house, Dad said the water wasn't all that good, so we had to carry it from spring down farther down the hill from where we lived. So you're always lugging these big buckets of water up the hill, and that was tough when I was younger. Other things was hard when I got older, but at that age, I guess maybe 6, 8, 10, big bucket of water coming up the mountain, and you're always sloshing it on your feet, and that was the hardest thing I remember.
What about you?
What's the question again?
What is the hardest part? What was the hardest part of your childhood, do you think?
Oh, the hardest part, I didn't really consider any of it hard. I had to milk the cow, feed the hogs, carry in stove wood, things like that. So when I was real young.
Okay. What were some of the things that entertained you when you were in childhood?
Well, we used to have activities at the church for the young people. Got involved with that. Neighbors and friends would have birthday parties, and you go to their house for birthday parties. There was a theater in Bannerville, but it wasn't built till I was about 10 or 12 years old. But they used to show movies in the college, Lee McCray College gym, for 10 cents. And I got to go a couple of times to that, and that was a thrill. You had to walk down a long bunch of steps down to the gymnasium, and it was at the foot of the hill. And they had a bobcat in a cage that would growl at you as you went down, which was pretty exciting at that age.
Do you have anything?
What I enjoyed the most when I was growing up, we lived way out in the country. At some point we didn't have electricity or water in the house, like I was told you, indoor bathroom and all that. And we were about 2.5 miles from a store of any sort. And we had lots of cousins that all lived around the neighborhood. And on Sunday, after church, after we cleaned up the kitchen, after all the relatives came and ate and so forth, we got the whole afternoon to play. And one of our favorite games was hide and seek, cowboys and Indians, all rolled into one. And we would some of us would stay hidden so long that they would kind of go to sleep at their hide place, and we'd really have to hunt them for sure. Of course, I wouldn't have done that, so. But that was a lot of fun because you got together with all your cousins, and all together there was about 15 or 17 of us.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Mm-hmm.
There was a good sized group of kids in our valley here, and we had done what she done, played cowboys and Indians. Roy Rogers and Gene Autry was the big Western things going on at the time. Had a lot of fun doing that.
Okay, what world events do you remember during your childhood?
The singing on Grandfather Mountain. It's the last Sunday in June every year. Used to go to that when we were young. Stay all night.
What kind of events?
Like world events
World
that you remember
events.
going on, possibly?
We weren't really interested in politics and stuff like that, and we didn't get into it. We just what usually happened to our community. I know we had a lot of fires when we was, I don't know how old I was, but the small town we go to, the shop or the post office and all, it was about 2.5 miles away. And for some reason, several of the buildings were caught on fire and burned up. And that was kind of traumatic, and it was scary. And I remember that because the whole horizon was lit up almost like the sun was shining, you know, except for all the smoke and all that. And I don't remember what year it was, but I just remember that several of the stores burned down.
I guess the next question, what were the biggest world issues during your childhood? Do you remember anything in specific?
Well, when I was 6 years old,
See?
I was in the first
That was
grade,
a good year.
and it was our writing assignment for the day was Harry Truman became president today. And I remember that vividly. And I've always been interested in politics somewhat. I'm a Democrat, proud of it. I said that for my grandfather. He was a strong Democrat. He worked for the WPA and was a powder foreman. When I was in grade school, the war has just ended when I went into first grade. In 47, 48, Israel was made a country in 47. And it was an airlift where the U.S. had to fly planes of food and water and everything into Berlin. And then later, there was a Cuban Missile Crisis. That was in 1960, the year I got out of the Air Force. A lot of different things.
Can you remember any world issue that?
No, for a lot of times we didn't have a television, and we had a radio. It was a battery radio a lot of times, and not many of our family I had heard older men talk about politics, and they'd sit around and argue this and that, but I was not really interested. But I do remember what affected a lot of people in the States, and it was the year we had the polio epidemic, and I do remember that. And that's the first time I remember getting interested in what was going on somewhere else, you know. None of us got polio, but one of the cousins that lived in Ohio did. And so we began to think more about what is happening in other places other than right where we lived.
I remember the polio scare too. We were quarantined to our property, and the kids figured out a way they could still play together. The adjoining neighbor kids, we'd meet at the line fence and we'd play different games, but each be on our property, but we still were together. But none of us got polio. And then when I was in the Air Force, when the salt vaccine was first discovered, and in service they do a lot of shot giving. And anytime a new medicine comes out, or especially on an epidemic type thing, they test a lot of them, or used to test them, a lot of them on the airmen. And I've had every kind of polio vaccine under the sun, I think. Pills, liquids under the tongue, and shots.
Well, moving on to the next question. Past the childhood, what was your life like when you first moved out of your parents' house? What's the first thing you can remember then?
Well, I moved out. I graduated from high school on the 24th of May, was sworn into the Air Force on the 28th of May. And my first leaving was joining the Air Force. watching my mother cry as I left.
Do you have anything specific you remember?
After I graduated from high school and went into nurses training, I moved from the home to the nurses home. And after I graduated from nurses training, Joe and I got married, and he rented a house, and I never did go back home, except to get the rest of my things, which was very few, because kids didn't have a lot of stuff to
I guess you've already answered this, and so have you ever moved out of state to live somewhere other than North Carolina?
Back in 1963, we moved to Oregon to find more work. And we stayed about 8 or 9 months, and my brother and my mother became ill, and we had to come back the next July. We went out in November and came back in July.
Do you have any specific memories of moving states, or?
Well, it was a pretty wild trip out. I had a 1957 Ford car. Wheel bearing went out somewhere in Utah.
That wasn't
Idaho.
a trip.
It's when you and I went out, it was.
Yeah, but we didn't have trouble going out, did we?
I took my brother and Harry Gwynn and his brother to Oregon and got a job, and then my brother and Clayton Gwynn got homesick, and I had to bring them home. And I had a rough time going out and coming back with that. The old car used a lot of oil. It used 44 quarts of oil going from here to Springfield, Oregon. And then on the way back, it used 48 quarts from Springfield, Oregon to Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And the engine blew. And we had to hitchhike, catch a bus, and walk home. All three.
Was that?
And then my wife and I went back out to Oregon.
He worked in a made shakes for roofs or something.
Yeah, cedar shake.
Cedar shakes, and I got a job at a nursing home. They told me that I better put in an application. It'd take a long time to get hired, and you'd have to get an Oregon license. And the owner of the nursing home came to get me that afternoon before we'd even gotten in our apartment. We were staying with his friends out there until these people moved out. And she said she had another person quit, and I went to work there, which was great. I really liked it.
And while we were there, she got a job right away, and I had a hard time finding one. Excuse me. And I was downtown Eugene, Oregon, walking down the street, trying to find a job when President Kennedy got killed. And this lady come running out of this store and grabbed my arm and said, "The president's been shot. The president's been shot." So I quit looking for a job, went home and watched TV for 3 days and nights, try to figure out who done that.
Did you like living on your own overall?
Sure, I did.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How hard do you think it was to provide money and housing for yourself after you moved out of your parents' house?
Well, the Air Force took good care of me. They didn't pay much, but you had all your meals were free and your health care was free. So I enjoyed that part of it. And then after the Air Force, I got a job working in a grocery store at the college bookstore, grocery store, feed store, and they sold gas at that time.
Do you have any?
Made $125 a month.
No, I like living in a nurse's home. We had regular study hours, and we had different classes and all that sort of stuff, but we had, it was fine. And, some people say they get homesick when they leave home and so forth, so I don't remember having any problems.
Okay, did it take a while to get used to living on your own? Did it take a while to get used to living on your own? Or?
No, we seemed to fall into it right well, didn't we?
When we were growing up, once you was 18 and out of school, you were expected to go off on your own, and some got married, some went on to college or whatever, but they didn't stay in their folks' house. Very few of them stayed in their parents' home after they were 18. Most of us was on our own, but 18 or 20 anyway.
What did you most about living on your own, do you think?
I could make more of the decisions about what
She still does make most of the decisions.
Not always.
What did you like least about living on your own?
Bills.
Yeah.
Okay. What did you think when you bought your first house?
Well, it's a sense of freedom. A sense of freedom to be able to buy a house. And we bought this house about 4 or 5 months after we were married.
Oh yeah, you bought that first house. The
Yeah.
first year you did. Mm-hmm.
And then we sold that after we moved to Oregon, didn't we?
No, and that's when you was going to school in Kinston. We rented it while we were in Oregon. We rented the house, and then when we came back, and you went to school, and then these people wanted to buy it, and it was only a 1-bedroom, and we had 1 child, and the way it's situated.
We had 2 children and 1 on the way.
Well, anyway, he's got his dates mixed up. But anyway, the thing we didn't build onto the house that we had bought was we found out there was the spring was where the spring was running in the basement, and we thought and it was right at the edge of the creek. And also, whoever built the 2 houses or 3 had only put in 1 septic tank, and there was not much way of building onto the house. So and he wanted some property to belong to his folks, so we sold the house and then bought some. You inherited some, and then he bought some from Tommy, didn't you, his brother? And then we saved money and, of course, got a loan and built this one.
Okay. What were some of the jobs that you had to make the money to buy the house, your final house in North Carolina?
Well, we talked about going to Kinston and going to electrician apprentice school. I came back from that and tried to find a job as an electrician and couldn't find one. And we'd heard a rumor that they was going to build a ski slope on Beach Mountain. So one day I started up to the end of the road and then walked the rest of the way to the top of the mountain to see if I could find a job. And run into a guy named Buck Smith. And he wanted to know what I was doing there. I told him I was looking for a job. He said, well, write me something on this piece of paper. And I wrote, now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their country. He read it and looked at me. He said, meet me over at Houndeers in the morning and I'll see where I can give you a job or not. Went over there the next morning. As I started to walk in the door, him and another guy came out of the office. And he said, you're hired, by the way. He says, come on, we're going to Hickory to buy you an office trailer. And we started walking towards the golf course. And I thought, that's just a crazy place, crazy way to get to Hickory from here. But we walked up to this shed and opened the door, and they rolled out an airplane. We got in the airplane, took off from the golf course at Houndeers and flew to Hickory. Bought a trailer and flew back.
What jobs did you have just to buy the house?
I worked part-time, mostly at night, so Joe'd be home with the kids. And we also rented from an older lady while we was having the house built. We had sold the first house. She was in her late 80s and wanted to live by herself, but her house was like 13 rooms altogether. And part of it was built before the Civil War, but her family wouldn't let her stay there, so they'd fix this apartment, but if somebody would rent it to kind of look after her. So in exchange for rent, I looked after her, and and I worked part-time as a nurse. And what else did we do?
Well, I worked for the big Carolina Caribbean Corporation for 10 years, and then after that it became a town on Beach Mountain, and I worked for the town.
And I did some sewing for people, and altering clothes if something didn't fit, or hemming it, or fixing it, or cutting it off pants and so forth. And we stayed, and we also had a big garden, canned and made a lot of jams and jellies and canned stuff and all that stuff.
Do you remember having nice neighbors when you first bought the house?
Yes, we did. We had people that we grew up
with.
People I grew up with. She didn't know them. But
I didn't know all of them, but they were all real nice, because we hadn't been there about 2 days till this family come and introduced themselves and welcomed us to the neighborhood. And of course, they knew Joe. He'd grown up there, but I hadn't. And we always had real good neighbors.
Okay. What was the best memory you had after you bought the house? Do you think?
Well, we hadn't been married that long. And when you first get married, you're as happy as you can be, thrilled to be on your own, and deeply in love with the lady you married. So we was pretty happy.
Were you proud to finally have the house that you bought?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next bit of questions. What were some of the stories you have from North Carolina, since you've grown up here for quite a while and lived here?
I don't know, just growing up in the mountains in the 40s and 50s was a lot different than it is now. Everybody lived on a small farm, had neighbors. You knew your neighbors. Everybody was a neighbor. If they needed help, you would help them, and they'd help you. It's just a good place to grow up, a good place to live.
Do you have anything else to add?
Stories as to when we was growing up?
Or just in North Carolina?
In North Carolina. We had, I remember in particular one year in 1960 that we had the big snows. We were out of school for 6 weeks, and it snowed every day practically. And so we had to walk to the neighbors, and we would get together and play cards and tell stories of what happened, before, because you didn't have, we had a neighbor that had a TV, but it was like over a mile away, and the snow is about up to your armpits when you're a little, well, let's see, some of the kids were smaller. It's not worth it to go watch TV, so we'd shovel pass and so forth, and we'd get together at somebody's houses, the local people, and we played rook and rummy and played checkers and, played games and all that sort of stuff. And the older folks always told stories, and they always liked to tell ghost stories. And it's mostly it happened in North Carolina, there's a lot of them. And both my grandfathers were living back then, and they knew a lot of stories. They both worked in the mines, the cranberry mines, and they had a lot of mining stories. But I guess the biggest stories is listening to those stories.
Yeah, we had a neighbor lady, Miss Mary Blair, that used to come and visit, especially in the wintertime. Back then, nobody had any electric hair clippers, and Mom had these old hand clippers, and she'd try to cut her hair, and she just more or less pulled it out. And Miss Mary would come, and she could cut it, and she could use those clippers just right. She didn't pull and yank your hair when she cut them with the clippers.
Were there any other stories you have from North Carolina? Or any stories in general that you've had throughout your life? Things you've done?
Stories about what I've done? Well, I've worked at several different places. Like I said, I worked at the exchange store at the college. And then I went to Oregon. I worked for Lacus Produce in Banner Elk for a year. I worked at the hospital some, about 3 or 4 years. And then I went to Winston, the electrician apprentice school, couldn't get a job, and got the job for Carolina Caribbean on Beach Mountain. Worked for them for 10 years. And then I worked for Department of Transportation as a clerk for 4 years. And then I went back to Beach Mountain and worked for the town of Beach Mountain for 18 years as a public works director.
What do you think you've learned about your community since you've lived here?
Well, I've been kindly involved with community activities over the year. I was a Boy Scout leader when I got out of the Air Force in 1960 for a while. I worked with Scouts a lot. And then, like I said, I was interested in politics and got involved with that. And that gets you into being put on boards. I'm on the Avery County Planning Board and the Banner Elk Board of Adjustment. And then here lately I've been put on the Fire Commission for Avery County. So I'm pretty much involved.
What about you?
I worked with the Girl Scouts and the Cub Scouts and the Webelos. And then I got into decorating wedding cakes. And I met a lot of people, in North Carolina. And we took cakes as far as Charlotte and Johnson City and Hickory and Lenore and Morganton, and they'd serve anywhere from 150 to 500 people. And we gardened a lot, and I taught a Sunday school class for about 10 years, didn't I? Yeah, 10 years, I think. And I worked on other committees. The fire department just had to raise money for most of their equipment and stuff, and they didn't get much fire tax, did they? And so we formed a ladies' auxiliary. You like the back of my head, don't you? And we helped raise money. We'd have rummage sales and bake sales and all that sort of stuff to help raise money for the fire department. And I don't know. We stayed real busy.
So, do you think you've left a lasting impact on your community?
I think the community's probably left a lasting impact on me. I don't know if I've done anything worthwhile or not.
You said you were on the board of planning?
Board of Adjustment with the town of Banner Elk and the Avery County Planning Board.
Was there anything specific you remember doing on it for the community?
Well, we've worked on different ordinances that the county commissioners were thinking about passing, and done a lot of research on them and helped plan out how they would take place and make sure they followed the laws.
Okay, next question. What were your hobbies and interests? Could be from childhood or even now.
Well, when I was in high school, I wanted to be a geologist, but I wasn't able to afford college, so I really just became a rock hound. Done a lot of prospecting, and even found some native silver here on our property. Little specks of it in the different kind of rocks that we have here. I'm interested on the outdoors, hiking and rock climbing, that kind of thing. And when I worked with the Carolina Caribbean Corporation, and they were building the Land of Oz. I was lucky enough to be sent to Tolan, Connecticut, and I got my hot air balloon pilot license. And we went around on tours with the hot air balloon and the Oz characters to different towns advertising for the Land of Oz.
What hobbies or interests?
When I was growing up, one of my favourite things was collecting recipes, cutting them out of magazines and newspapers and all that, and putting them in books, and just collecting lots of recipes, just different recipes.
Next question. What life events or things that happened to you are most important to you? Can be anything that you think, just stories you have or things you remember. Just
the most interesting thing?
Or things. It can be multiple things.
The most interesting has been Evenell. We've been married for 50 years and over. She's been a big part of my life.
Do you have anything?
The most interesting thing, I think, that through my whole life is just getting to know other people, patients, co-workers, neighbors, friends. It's just people are interesting, and I think that's been the most interesting thing, is the people we've been involved with and the people we've got to know.
Now, the next part. What would you guys like to talk about? Anything I've missed that you can go in depth about? Or anything?
I can't think of anything specific right now.
I can't either.
You know, we don't want to get into telling all the stories because we would be here a long, long time.
Was there just a few you could say?
There's a few that the family tells, you know, about different people and our ancestors and some of the scrapes they got into and some of the things that they'd rather not tell. When I was in 8th grade, we had to write. We was going to be going into high school, and our teacher said we needed to know how to write term papers so we could pick our subject. So I decided that all the stories that happens in families that nobody wanted to talk about, nobody wanted to tell, was very hush-hush, that was what I was going to do. So I interviewed several older people that lived near the school, which it was off limits to go off school grounds, but it was just down the bank there to the hill to the left. So I called it Skeletons in the Closet. So I did a lot of research on some ancestors and some just friends and relatives and their families. And I thought that was very interesting. It may be off or on the record, whatever, but my mom didn't like the idea very much. She read it. I got a good grade on it. I got an A+. But she burned the paper in a wood cook stove. But I'd done a lot of my research, so I pretty well remember most of it.
Anything or any funny stories you'd like to tell? Childhood having to do with anything, or about living in North Carolina?
Nothing I can think of right now.
Okay. Next thing. Where have you been that you've liked the most? Like, what places in the world have you been that you enjoyed being the most?
I liked Oregon very well. I'd like to live in Springfield, Oregon. It's the only other place other than North Carolina that I've ever been that I would like to live there the rest of my life.
Is there any reason why in specific, or?
Well, it looks a whole lot like this place here, but that's big sky country out there. The mountains are taller, the valleys are deeper and more level. There's more room to the rivers to build than there are in the mountains in North Carolina. It's just a beautiful, beautiful place.
I liked Oregon too. I really, like he said, here, you know, the mountains, it's just like they're just closing in on you. They're so close, you know, you're going down the hill and up. Out there, there are huge mountains and all that stuff,
Long
but they're
valleys.
spread out, you know. and it's and the climate is pretty much like here, except you don't get as much snow. And down in the where we were up in the mountains, they close the passes in the high mountains. And another place I liked real well is Mexico.
Any reason why?
It's not a lot of steep hills and all that stuff where we were. It was a desert. It's just desert, but it's just, you know, just something I really like. It's the altitude's high. Some people have trouble breathing, but it's the people there are poor. But it's just miles and miles and miles and miles of desert, and I just like it. You know, I like seeing the cactus and all the different kind of scrub trees and some of the animals that run loose in the desert, and I like it.
So you guys like the outdoors in general?
I do, yeah.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you would like to talk about that hasn't been said?
Nothing that I know would be.
We'd like to talk about the grandchildren.
Grandchildren?
Yeah.
We have 7 of them.
And we talk about them and all the things that they do, and when the new pictures comes in each year, and watch them grow. And that's what we look forward to seeing the grandkids.
And you're the first grandchild to do an interview with us. We appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you. You have anything that you'd like to add? Any last quotes or anything?
Y'all come back now.
Come when you can, son.
And we'll do this some more if you want to. And we'll do some cooking, and baking especially.
Okay.